I've been feeding people for 31 years, and I can tell you the one thing nobody ever talks about: the hands. Not what you do with them, what they become. My mother had hands like mine, thick across the knuckles, scarred along the left palm from a bread knife that slipped in '98, rough enough to pick up a hot pan lid without flinching. Her mother had the same hands. I saw them once in a photograph when I was 11, my grandmother's hands resting on a wooden table in a kitchen I never visited, and I remember thinking they looked like mine. I didn't understand then what that meant. I do now. My name is Orrin Fell. I'm 56 years old. I've been a cook on survey and excavation crews since I was 25, and for the last 14 months, I've been feeding the archaeological team assigned to the Hall of the Sovereign Seat on Dane Reach. Dane Reach is a colony world, though calling it a colony is generous. It's a plateau of gray basalt under a pale blue-gray sky, 2 moons visible even at midday, and a sun that gives light but never warmth. The settlement, Fells Ridge, no relation, sits 40 minutes by crawler from the dig site. The hall itself was carved into the face of a granite escarpment by a civilization that's been dead so long the geologists argue about the dating. 40,000 years, 60,000, maybe more. The numbers stop, meaning anything past a certain point. They built the hall, they left, and nobody knows where they went or why. What they left behind is the Hall of the Sovereign Seat. It's a single chamber, roughly rectangular, 200 meters long and 60 wide. The ceiling is vaulted, pale stone arches rising to a height that makes you stop the first time you walk in. Columns line both long walls, thick as old-growth timber, carved floor to ceiling with inscriptions that the linguists have spent decades on and decoded maybe 4% of. The east wall is open, 5 arched openings, each 20 meters tall, looking out over the plateau and the gray morning sky. That's where the light comes in. Cold daylight, the color of old silver, flooding the floor from dawn to dusk. At night the hall goes dark. No artificial light the team has brought in changes the feeling. The hall tolerates us. That's the best word for it. At the center of the hall sits the throne. I've heard people talk about it the way scholars talk about everything, with precision, with taxonomy, with the weight of funded curiosity. They call it the sovereign seat. They've measured it, scanned it, sampled its surface chemistry, mapped its inscriptions, run spectral analysis on the veining in its stone. They know its dimensions, 4.6 meters from floor to the top of the high straight back. Its mass, estimated because they can't move it. It's fused to the bedrock. Its composition, a pale stone similar to but not quite matching anything in the Colonial Geological Survey, veined with a darker material that reads as partly mineral and partly something the metallurgists don't have a word for. I call it the big chair. I've walked past it twice a day for 14 months, once on the morning round when I bring the breakfast trays to the East End workstations, and once on the evening round when I bring the late meal to whoever's still in the hall. The shortest path from my kitchen station behind the northwest colonnade to the East End tables runs directly past the throne. You go between the 4th and 5th columns, cross the open floor, past the big chair on the left, and turn right at the instrument cluster Dr. Sarn's team set up near the 3rd eastern arch. I could do it blind. I nearly have some mornings when I'm up at 4 and the hall is dark and the only light is what leaks in from the moons. The throne doesn't bother me. It's stone. It's very old stone and it's very large and it's carved with things I can't read, but it's stone. I set my hand on it once the first week, leaning against the armrest while I retied a boot. Cold. Ordinary cold, the kind any stone has in a hall that never gets warm. I didn't think about it. I retied the boot and went back to my kitchen. That was before I understood what the throne does to people who approach it with intent. There's a difference. I didn't know it then. I know it now, but I'll get to that. I learned the history from Sarn, piece by piece, over 14 months of late-night teas and early morning porridge. The throne had a record. 40 years of contact attempts, all logged, all failed. The early ones were crude, first survey teams, military first, the way it always is with precursor sites. A garrison commander named Vesk Aldrin was the first to sit in it, full uniform ceremonial sidearm. The stone went cold under him, not room temperature cold, deep cold. The kind that reaches into the marrow. He lasted 9 seconds, frostbite on both palms, both thighs, lost feeling in his left hand for 2 years. After that they sent scholars, careful ones, gloved, instrumented, approaching with the reverence of professionals who study things that killed the last person who touched them. Dr. Taith, the first senior archaeologist, spent 3 years developing a contact protocol, staged approaches, incremental pressure, thermal monitoring at every step. She placed her right hand, gloved, on the left armrest on a Tuesday morning in the 4th year. The readings went normal for 8 seconds. On the 9th second, the stone dropped to -40. Her glove froze to the surface. They had to cut it away. She never came back to the site. There were others. A delegation from the Heir, tall, thin-boned, the closest species we'd encountered to whatever built the hall, sent a formal emissary in the 12th year. He approached the throne with the kind of ritual precision that suggested they thought they knew what it was. He placed both hands on the armrests and spoke a phrase in a language nobody on the team recognized. The stone went cold, not as cold as it went for Aldrin, but cold enough. The emissary withdrew, said nothing, and the Heir never sent another. In the 23rd year, a young postdoctoral researcher named Gil Emery, on a dare from her colleagues, the kind of thing that happens on remote digs when people have been away from civilization too long, sat in the throne. Not on it. In it. Settled into the seat, put her arms on the armrests, leaned back against the high carved back. The cold came faster than it had for anyone else. 3 seconds. She screamed. They pulled her out and she was shaking for an hour, and she said afterward that the cold wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the silence. She said it felt like the throne looked at her and found nothing worth speaking to. I heard that story from Sarn on a night when neither of us could sleep, and it stayed with me longer than it should have. The silence. The throne looked at you and found nothing worth speaking to. That's a specific kind of rejection, not violence, not anger, just disregard, the way you'd look at a tool that doesn't fit the job. The last formal attempt before Sarn's project was a joint team from 3 institutions, pooled funding, pooled expertise, 18 months of preparation. They built a remote contact apparatus, a mechanical hand, essentially, with the same thermal signature as living tissue, designed to replicate the biochemistry of touch without risking another injury. They placed the mechanical hand on the armrest. Nothing happened, not cold, not heat, not silence, just nothing, as if the throne couldn't tell the mechanical hand was there at all. The team published a paper arguing that the sovereign seat had degraded past functional recovery. The consensus held, dead stone. Sarn disagreed. Sarn always disagreed. Dr. Elda Sarn is the lead archaeologist, 59, thin as a cable and twice as tough. She's given 15 years of her life to the sovereign seat, not just this dig, but the 3 that preceded it, the ones that ran out of funding or got shut down by the administrative council or simply failed. She was a junior researcher on the first survey team that mapped the hall's interior, back when the inscriptions were still thought to be decorative. She was the one who argued they were linguistic. She was right. She's been right about most things, which is probably why the council keeps giving her 1 more year and then pulling the floor out. Her deputy is Geist. I don't know his first name. Nobody uses it. He's 42, tall, careful, runs the instrumentation. Doesn't talk unless he has something to say. I like him. He eats everything I put in front of him, and he brings his tray back to the wash station himself, which is more than most of them do. Torin is the military liaison. Every dig on a precursor site gets one. He's 38, wide-shouldered, spent time on the frontier before this posting. Bored mostly. The hall has been inert for 40 years. There's nothing to liaise about. He eats at 6 sharp, says thank you, and goes back to his quarters. I'm giving you names because it matters later. I didn't know it would matter. But these are the people I was feeding, and a cook knows his people the way a mechanic knows an engine, by what they need, by what they avoid, by the small sounds they make when something is off. Sarn skips breakfast when the data is bad. Geist eats more when he's anxious, not less. Torin hasn't touched the dried apricots in 3 months, which means his stomach is acting up again. But he won't say so because he's military and they'd rather die than mention a stomach. I see these things. It's not special. Any cook who's been doing the job long enough sees them. You learn to read the room by the trays that come back, what's touched, what's untouched, what's been rearranged to look touched when it wasn't. My mother used to say the table tells you everything the mouth won't. She was a cook too. 28 years in the cafeteria at Harlan Price Industrial back on Karen. She fed 400 people a day, and she could tell you which floor was under pressure by what they left on their plates. Her mother did the same, different kitchen, different world. I don't know how far back it goes, far enough. There are 23 people on this dig. 23 mouths, 23 stomachs, 23 sets of preferences and aversions and allergies and stubborn refusals to eat anything green. I feed all of them. I've been doing it here since the team deployed 14 months ago, and before that I fed a crew of 30 on the Eshel Ridge survey, and before that a crew of 19 on the orbital platform at Vesk, and before that, well, it goes back. 31 years of kitchens. Some of them were proper kitchens with steel counters and gas burners and walk-in cold rooms. Some of them were 2 crates and a heating element in a cargo hold. My station on Dane Reach is somewhere in between. A long trestle behind the northwest colonnade, a pair of induction plates, a prep surface I built from salvaged decking, and a cold locker I buried in the floor where the stone was already cracked. It works. I've worked with worse. People don't see the cook. I mean that literally. They see the food. They see the tray. They see the bowl of soup appear at their elbow when they've been staring at a screen for 6 hours and forgot to come to the mess area. They don't see who carried it. I've been in rooms with 30 people and I promise you not one of them could tell you when I entered or when I left. It's not invisibility. It's just the way it works. The cook is part of the furniture. I made my peace with that a long time ago. The food matters. Whether they see me carrying it doesn't. My day starts at 4. Always has, every posting, every kitchen. 4 in the morning in the dark, while the hall is a cathedral of shadow and the 2 moons throw pale bars of light across the stone floor. I light the induction plates. I boil water. I set the grains. Dane Reach doesn't grow much, but the resupply runs bring millet and barley and a dense yellow grain from kale that cooks like polenta if you give it time and attention, and I give it both. I slice bread I baked the evening before. I set out the dried fruit, the reconstituted protein, the pressed tea. By 5 the station smells like a kitchen, a real kitchen, not a field mess, because there's a difference and the difference is care, and by 5:30 the first of them arrive. Sarn is always first. She takes her tea standing, one hand on the cup, eyes already on the data from the overnight sensors. She doesn't look at me. She looks at the numbers, but her left hand reaches for the pressed biscuit I put at the edge of the tray without her asking, and she eats it while she reads, and she doesn't notice she's eating. I notice. That's the job. Creve, the senior linguist, comes next. He's 61, balding, quiet in the mornings, loud after 3 cups of tea. He eats oatmeal only, no salt, extra dried plums. He's told me this once. I remember it every morning. That's not remarkable. I remember what all 23 of them eat. I remember that Disapal can't have soy but won't admit it, so I cook around it without telling her. I remember that Len Arath, the junior tech, grew up on a farming station and misses fresh bread so much he closes his eyes when he takes the first bite of a warm loaf. I remember that Marin Holt eats everything but leaves the crusts in a neat pile on the left side of her plate. And I remember that her mother did the same, because Marin told me so on a night when she was tired and talking about home. These are not special observations. These are what a cook collects by being present. You stand in your kitchen and you watch the trays go out and you watch them come back, and over months the pattern becomes a portrait. I know these people better than their colleagues do, not because I'm smarter, because I'm the one who's looking. I'm telling you all of this, the hall, the team, the throne, my kitchen, my hands, my mother's hands, because I need you to understand what happened on the last night, and I need you to understand that none of it was planned. I didn't do anything. I tripped. The project was dying. Sarn got the message 3 days before the end. I know because I brought her the afternoon tea, and she was sitting at her workstation with the dispatch on her screen and her hands flat on the table, and her face the color of the Dane-reached sky, gray, empty, done. The Administrative Council had reviewed the 14-month data package. The sovereign seat remained unresponsive. No contact event. No activation. No measurable change in surface conductivity, thermal signature, acoustic resonance, or any of the other 47 parameters Sarn's team had been monitoring around the clock. The Council's conclusion was the same one it had reached 3 times before. The site was archaeologically significant but functionally inert. The throne was dead stone. Funding was reallocated. Equipment would ship within the week. Personnel would rotate to standing assignments. 15 years, 3 digs, 14 months on this one, and the answer was the same as it had always been: nothing. I didn't say anything. There's nothing a cook says to that. I set the tea down. I'd made it the way she liked, strong, no sweetener, with the pressed biscuits from the last resupply that she'd mentioned once in passing months ago were the same kind her daughter sent from home. I don't know if she noticed. She picked up the tea. She drank it. She didn't eat the biscuits. I took the tray back and went to prep for dinner. The next 3 days were the slowest I've ever worked. Not because the work slowed, the team was packing, dismantling sensor arrays, boxing core samples, labeling artifacts for transit, but because the hall felt different, emptier. Every cable they coiled and every crate they sealed took something out of the air. The columns stood the same. The throne sat the same. But the life was going out of the place, the human life, the murmur and footfall and argument and discovery that had filled it for 14 months, and in its place the old silence was coming back. The hall was reclaiming itself. I kept cooking. That's what you do. The work doesn't stop because the project is dying. People still need to eat. If anything, they need it more, because when everything else is falling apart, the meal is the one thing that stays. I made the good food those last 3 days, not the stretch budget rations, the real food, the slow-cooked things, the baked things, the things that take time and attention. I used the last of the dried herbs. I used the butter I'd been saving. If they were going to eat their last meals in the hall of the sovereign seat, they were going to eat well. Nobody commented on it. They never do, but they ate. On the second day, Sarn's deputy Geist found me behind the colonnade at midnight, sat on a supply crate and ate an entire loaf of bread without speaking. When he finished, he looked at me and said, 14 months fell, and I said, I know, and he nodded and left. That's the most personal thing Geist has ever said to me. Bread will do that. Give a man bread when he's breaking and he'll tell you the thing he can't tell anyone else. I've seen it happen 100 times. That night the atmosphere in the hall was the worst I'd seen. 23 people eating in near silence. Sarn had told them. The dig was over. 14 months of work boxed up and shipped back. The linguists, who had been so close to a breakthrough on the third quadrant inscriptions, or so they believed, stared at their food like it had insulted them. Marin Holt, the structural analyst, ate with one hand and held her forehead with the other. Even Torin, who didn't care about precursor archaeology, ate his meal with the grim efficiency of a man who has been told to vacate. I adjusted the menu that night. Nothing dramatic. I made the grain cakes the way Sarn's mother made them. She'd told me the method once, 8 months ago, standing in my kitchen at 2 in the morning because she couldn't sleep, talking about her childhood on Vale. Butter fried, flipped late, salt on one side only. It's the kind of detail most people wouldn't remember. I remember all of them. That's what the hands are for, not just the cooking, the listening, the seeing. You make the thing a person needs before they know they need it, and you don't tell them why. You just set it down and walk away. My mother did that every day for 28 years. Fed 400 people and never once said, "Look what I made for you." The food said it. The food always says it. Sarn ate 2 of the grain cakes. She didn't say anything about them, but she ate them, and that was enough. The last night. I need to tell this part carefully because it's the part people ask about, and most of what they've heard is wrong. There was no ceremony, no ritual, no summoning. I wasn't chosen. I wasn't called. I was carrying soup. It was late past the 22nd hour. The hall was dark except for the portable lamps the night team had set up near the eastern arches. 4 people on the night shift. Geist, Len Arath, junior tech, 26, quiet, good kid, Disapal, scanning specialist, and Creve, the other linguist, who had refused to stop working on the third quadrant inscriptions even though the project was dead. They'd asked for a late meal. I said I'd bring it at 22:30. I made the soup. Not the fast one, the one that takes longer. Bone stock, root vegetables from the hydroponic tray I'd set up in the cold locker, dried herbs, salt, thyme. The good soup. The kind you make when you know people are tired and cold and the thing they were working toward just ended. I've been making that soup for 31 years. My mother taught me. Her mother taught her. Stupid thing to carry across generations, a recipe for soup. But there it is. The trick is the stock. You can't rush it. You put the bones in the water before the water boils, and you bring it up slow, and you skim the gray foam that rises in the first 20 minutes, and you don't stir it. My mother was specific about that. You don't stir bone stock. You let it find its own way. You give it heat and time and the patience not to interfere, and the bones give back everything they carried. Marrow, mineral, the deep savory base that makes a bowl of soup feel like someone is looking after you. I stood at my induction plate in the dark kitchen behind the colonnade, and I watched the stock come up, and I skimmed it and I waited. And the hall was silent around me except for the distant murmur of the night team, and the faint wind off the plateau coming through the arches. When it was ready, I added the vegetables. Diced fine Dane Reach root vegetables are fibrous, and if you cut them too large, they stay woody no matter how long you cook them. Dried herbs crushed between my palms because the oils release better from hand heat than from a mortar. Salt, not much. You can always add salt. You can never take it back. I tasted it, pressed the back of my hand to the outside of the pot just below the rim. The heat sat right in the meat of my knuckle. Ready. I loaded the tray. 4 bowls, 4 spoons, bread I'd baked that afternoon, a small pot of the dried fruit Len liked. The tray was heavy. I could have made 2 trips, but I've been carrying heavy trays across uncertain ground for 3 decades. You learn to balance. You learn where your feet are. I walked the route I'd walked every evening for 14 months. Out from behind the northwest colonnade, between the 4th and 5th columns, across the open floor. The hall was enormous around me. Dark, except for the lamp glow from the eastern end and the faint light of the 2 moons coming in through the arches. The columns were pale shapes in the darkness, their inscriptions invisible, just the faint texture of carved stone under my fingertips when I trailed a hand along them for guidance. I've always done that, touched the walls, the columns, the door frames. A cook's habit. You navigate a kitchen by feel as much as by sight. The throne was ahead of me, off to the left, a darker shape against the dark floor. I knew where it was the way I knew where my own cutting board was, by the space it occupied, by the slight resistance in the air around it, by the years of walking past it. I was 6 meters from the throne when my boot caught something on the floor. A cable, one of Geist's sensor leads, strung from the instrument cluster to a repeater they'd set up near the base of the throne. I'd stepped over it 100 times. This time I didn't see it. My left foot hooked under the cable, and I went forward. Not a fall. 31 years of carrying trays teaches you how to not fall. My body compensated. My right hand tightened on the tray, keeping it level. My left hand shot out for balance, reaching for the nearest solid surface. My palm landed on the left armrest of the throne. Bare hand. I'd pulled my glove off 20 minutes ago to check the soup temperature. You press the back of your hand to the outside of the pot, just below the rim, and if the heat sits right in the meat of your knuckle, it's ready, and I'd forgotten to put it back on. Cook's habit. The glove was in my apron pocket. My hand was bare. The stone was warm. I'm going to say that again because it's the fact that changed everything and it needs to sit right. The stone was warm, not hot, not glowing, not vibrating or humming or doing any of the things the instruments were built to detect. It was warm, body temperature, the kind of warm a bowl has when someone was just holding it, the kind of warm a chair has when someone just stood up. In 14 months I had leaned on the throne once and it had been cold. Every record, every survey, every instrument reading for 40 years said the same thing. The sovereign seat was cold stone, dead, inert, cold. My hand was on it and it was warm. I should have pulled away. I knew the rules. Don't touch the throne. Don't approach it with bare skin. 3 people had been hospitalized over the decades, cold burns, the kind that go deep, that blackened tissue. The throne didn't like being touched. That was the consensus. But it wasn't burning me. It was warm, just warm. And my hand was on it, and some part of me, the part that checks the pot, the part that waits for the bread to tell you when it's done, the part that listens, that part said stay. So I stayed. My palm was flat on the armrest. The stone was smooth under my skin, smoother than it looked. The inscriptions were everywhere, fine line carvings so dense they were almost a texture. But under my palm the surface felt like worn wood, like a cutting board that's been used for 40 years, like something that had been touched so many times by so many hands that the stone itself had learned the shape of a human grip. I felt it before I saw it, a change in the warmth. Not hotter, deeper. The warmth moved, I don't have a better word for it. It moved from the surface down into the stone, and then it came back, and when it came back it brought something with it. Not heat, something else. A pulse. Slow, steady, the rhythm of a heartbeat at rest. Then the light. The inscriptions around my hand began to change. The carved lines, fine, precise, running in dense parallel tracks across the armrest like the grain in old wood, started to fill from within. Not surface light, not reflection. Something from inside the stone, rising into the carved channels like water filling an irrigation ditch. Gold, deep gold, the color of late-season honey, of the wheat my mother used to buy in 5-kilo sacks from the market on 3rd Street in Heir. It started at my palm and moved outward, following the inscriptions, tracing the lines along the armrest, down the arm of the throne to the base, across the base to the other arm, up the other arm. Slow, patient, the speed of a vine climbing a wall. Every line it touched filled with that deep gold and held steady, not flickering. I heard Len first, a sharp breath, then a scanner hitting the floor. Then Dissaz's voice, tight and careful, saying Geist in the tone that means look at this right now. Then Geist's chair scraping stone as he stood. Fell, Geist said, quiet, controlled. Fell, don't move. I wasn't planning to. The light kept spreading. It reached the base of the throne and didn't stop. The carved lines continued. I hadn't noticed this before, but the inscriptions ran off the throne and into the floor, radiating outward like the roots of a tree, and the gold light followed them. It lit the floor in a slow circle, 2 meters, 3, 5, tracking the inscription lines that had been there all along, hidden under 40 years of dust and boot traffic and equipment cables, unnoticed because nobody had ever looked down. The throne's back was illuminating now. The inscriptions there were different, larger, more complex, arranged in what the linguists would later call a formal declarative sequence, though I didn't know that then. I just saw the lines fill, row by row, bottom to top, that deep gold rising like a tide up the high straight back of the chair until the entire throne was lit. It was beautiful. I'm not a man who uses that word often, but it was beautiful. The throne glowed in the dark hall like a single candle in a cathedral, and the gold light caught the dust in the air, and the dust became a haze of fine sparks, suspended, turning. And for a moment I forgot the tray in my right hand and the cable under my boot and the soup getting cold and the 23 people who needed feeding. I just stood there with my hand on the armrest of something that had been dead for longer than my species had been walking upright, and I watched it breathe. Then the columns started. The two nearest columns, the fourth and fifth on the left wall, the ones I walked between every day, their inscriptions lit. The same gold, the same deep internal light, the same slow upward progression. And then the next pair. And the next. Column by column, the hall was waking up. Creve dropped what he was holding. I heard it shatter, a ceramic stylus case, probably irreplaceable, but he wasn't thinking about that. He was staring at the columns with his mouth open and his hands at his sides and tears running down his face. Because he was a linguist, and the inscriptions he'd spent his career on were lighting up like a circuit board, and he could see, for the first time, the connections between them. The lines didn't just decorate each column. They ran between columns, across the ceiling, down into the floor, and the gold light was showing the whole system at once, the thing no scan had ever revealed. The architecture of a language built into the bones of a building. "Get Sarn," Geist said to Len. Len didn't move. Geist said it again. Len ran. 3 minutes later, I know because Geist's instruments logged it, Sarn came through the northwest entrance at a run. She was in her sleeping clothes. No boots, bare feet on cold stone. She'd been asleep for the first time in 3 days when Len hammered on her door and said the words she'd spent 15 years waiting to hear. "The throne is active." She stopped 12 meters away. The hall was gold. Every inscription on every surface, columns, floor, walls, the arched ceiling, filled with that deep, steady light. The throne was the brightest point, blazing at the center like the filament of a bulb, and I was standing beside it with my palm on the armrest and a tray of soup in my other hand. "Fell," she said, her voice cracked on the word. "Fell, what did you do?" "I tripped," I said. "It's the truth, I tripped, I caught myself. My hand landed on the armrest, that's all." People came in behind Sarn. Half the team, pulled from their bunks by the light, you could see it from outside, the gold glow pouring through the eastern arches and painting the plateau. Torin was there, sidearm on his hip out of reflex, his hand hovering near it and then dropping to his side because there was nothing to draw on. Marin Holt stood in the entrance with both hands over her mouth. 2 of the linguists were already crying. Someone, I think it was Veska, the geochemist, started recording on a handheld. Nobody came closer. They stood in a loose semicircle 30 meters out, watching. The hall was alive around them. The inscriptions ran like veins of gold through the stone, pulsing faintly, not flickering, pulsing, that same slow heartbeat rhythm I'd felt under my palm, and the air was warm. Warmer than Dane Reach's air had any right to be, and it smelled of something I couldn't name, something mineral and clean, like rain on hot stone. I watched their faces because that's what I do, I watch faces. Sarn's was open, stripped of the control she'd worn for 15 years, raw and wet and terrified and elated in equal measure. She was shaking. Not visibly, you'd have to know her the way I knew her, by the tea she held and the biscuits she didn't eat, to see the fine tremor in her jaw. Torin had gone still in the way military people go still when the situation exceeds their training. Not frozen. Waiting. His eyes tracked the gold light across the ceiling the way they'd track a threat, but there was no threat, and he was beginning to understand that, and the understanding was harder to carry than the readiness had been. Marin Holt was crying. She wasn't making noise about it. She just stood in the entrance with her hands at her sides and the tears running, and she looked at me across the lit floor, and I think she was the first one who saw it, not the throne, not the light, but me. She saw the cook, standing with a tray, hand on the armrest, surrounded by something that hadn't spoken to a living soul in 40,000 years, and it was speaking now, and it was speaking to him. Paul had her scanner up, sweeping arcs across the hall, but her hands were shaking so badly the readings must have been useless. Len stood halfway between the entrance and the throne, stuck mid-stride, as if his legs had made a decision his mind hadn't caught up with yet. Behind them all, in the far entrance, I could see more shapes arriving, the rest of the team, drawn out of bunks and workrooms by the golden light that was pouring through every opening in the hall and lighting up the dark plateau outside like a signal fire. 23 people, all of them looking at me, and I was holding a tray. The readings, Geist said. He was at his station, hands moving fast, pulling data. Sarn, the readings are, I don't have a category for this. The thermal signature alone is it's coherent. It's patterned. It's not residual heat. It's organized. Organized how? Sarn asked. Like a signal, Geist said, and then quieter, like it's thinking. I stood there, my palm on the warm stone, the tray level in my right hand, because that's what you do. You hold the tray level always, no matter what. And I felt the pulse under my skin, and I waited, because the soup was not ready when I checked the pot earlier, and I had waited then too. And a cook learns that the most important thing you do is wait for the thing that's warming to tell you when it's done. The light shifted, the gold deepened, not brighter, deeper, the color of old embers, the color of the wheat in the photograph of my grandmother's hands. And the pulse quickened, just slightly, the way a sleeping person's heartbeat quickens before they open their eyes. The throne was warm under my hand, not hot, not painful, warm in a way that was specific, targeted, as if the warmth was not radiating outward but moving inward through my skin, into the meat of my palm, into the bones of my hand. I could feel it in my wrist, in my forearm, a warmth that was not heat but recognition. The throne was reading my hand the way I read a tray, by what it carried, by the weight of what it had held. I understood in that moment that the throne had been doing this from the beginning, not for 40 years, for my 14 months. Every time I'd walked past it, every time I'd trailed my hand along the nearby column, every time I'd leaned against the armrest to retie a boot, it had been reading. Patient, slow, taking the measure of me the way I take the measure of a kitchen, by being there, by paying attention, by waiting for the thing to reveal itself. It wasn't dead. It had never been dead. It had been doing what I do. It had been watching the room. And it had been watching me. The voice came through the stone. I need to be precise about this, because the linguists and the physicists and the signal analysts have all had their go at explaining it, and none of them are right. It was not sound. It did not travel through the air. My ears did not hear it. No microphone in the hall recorded it. Geist's instruments logged a momentary anomaly in the subsonic range, a structured vibration, he called it later, at a frequency below human hearing, but that's not what it was. That's the echo of what it was. The voice came through the stone, into my palm, up the bones of my hand, through my wrist and forearm and elbow and shoulder, into my chest. I felt it in my sternum the way you feel a deep bell. Not sound. Resonance. As if the throne had spoken a word into the stone and the stone had carried it through my skeleton the way a tuning fork carries a note, and my bones had understood it the way my ear understands language. 6 words, clear as any sentence I've ever heard, clearer because I didn't hear them, I knew them. They arrived inside me the way understanding arrives, not from outside, not through a channel, but all at once, entire, like remembering something you never forgot. Heir, the line was never broken. I'm going to let that sit for a moment because it sat in me for a long time before I could do anything with it. 6 words, 2 sentences, and inside them a meaning so large it took the rest of the night to unfold. The first thing I understood was that I was not the first. The throne had spoken before, not to the scholars, not to the military officers, not to the diplomats or the dignitaries or the alien delegations who had come over the decades with their credentials and their instruments and their careful, funded intentions. The throne had spoken to others, long ago, in the same way it was speaking to me, through the stone, through the hands, through the bones. It had spoken to the ones who built it, and then it had spoken to no one for a very long time. The second thing I understood was why. The precursors, whatever they called themselves, whatever name the linguists would eventually decode from the third quadrant inscriptions, did not build the sovereign seat for power. They did not build it for judgment, or for command, or for the kind of authority that requires a throne. They built it for continuity, for the survival of a single specific quality across deep time, across the death of civilizations, across the long silence between one kind of people and the next. And the quality was not strength. It was not intelligence. It was not ambition or courage or vision or any of the things that the scholars and the officers and the dignitaries brought with them when they placed their hands on the stone and waited for it to respond. The quality was sustenance. The sovereign line, the lineage the throne was built to recognize, was not a line of kings. It was a line of feeders, sustainers, the ones who keep others alive, the ones who get up before dawn and prepare what is needed and carry it to the people who need it and ask nothing in return and are never seen and never thanked and never noticed, because that is not why they do it. They do it because the food needs to be made, and someone needs to make it, and they are someone. The precursors understood something that I think we have always known but never said out loud, that the hand which feeds is the hand that holds, not in the sense of control, in the sense of continuation. Everything else, the strategies, the conquests, the great decisions, the civilizations built and toppled, all of it depends on someone somewhere getting up in the dark and making the meal. And if that hand stops, everything stops. Everything. So they built the succession around it. They encoded it not in genetics, not in bloodline as the biologists would understand it, but in practice, in the doing. They seeded the selection criterion into a behavior, the act of feeding others with attention and patience, and the kind of seeing that notices what a person needs before the person knows it themselves. And they trusted that this behavior would be carried forward, not through decree or inheritance, but through the oldest transmission there is. A mother showing a daughter how to hold the knife. A grandmother teaching a boy the soup that takes longer. Hands to hands across centuries, across the gaps between worlds unbroken. The line. My mother's hands, my grandmother's hands, the hands in the photograph on the wooden table, my hands on the armrest of a throne that had waited longer than human history for a hand like mine to land on it, not because I was special, not because I was chosen, because I was carrying a tray and I tripped, and the hand that reached out was the hand that had been shaped, generation after generation, by the work of feeding. The throne didn't choose me, it recognized me. There's a difference. It had rejected the others not because they were unworthy. It rejected them because they came with purpose, with intent. They placed their hands on the stone and asked it for something, for access, for knowledge, for power, for the validation of their credentials. And the throne read that asking and gave them silence, or cold, or the deep burn that said you are reaching and I am not for the ones who reach. I wasn't reaching, I was falling. My hand was on the stone because I needed to not drop the soup. And the throne read that, read the 31 years of trays, the hands scarred by bread knives and burned by pot lids and calloused by cutting boards, the instinct that keeps the tray level even when the ground isn't, and it said yes. This is the one. This is what we seeded. This is what we waited for. Heir, the line was never broken. I stood there and I felt the weight of it, not the weight of a crown or a throne or authority, the weight of a kitchen counter at 4 in the morning, the weight of a tray carried across a dark hall, the weight of every meal made and carried and set down and cleared away, unremarked for 31 years, for my mother's 28 years, for her mother's years before that, in a kitchen I never visited, on a world I never saw. The precursors knew something about power that we still haven't learned. They knew that the civilizations that endure are not the ones with the strongest armies or the cleverest scholars or the most ambitious leaders. They are the ones where someone gets up in the dark and feeds the people. They are the ones where that person is never promoted, never decorated, never asked to sit at the table they set. Because the moment you elevate the sustainer, the moment you give them the crown, the chair, the title, you change them. You make them something other than what they were. And what they were is the only thing that keeps everything running. So the precursors did something extraordinary and something very simple. They built a throne that would refuse every hand that reached for it. Every hand that wanted to sit. Every hand that carried purpose, ambition, the need to be recognized. The throne would burn those hands or freeze them or simply ignore them because wanting the throne was the one disqualification for the throne. And then they waited. They waited for a hand that wasn't reaching. A hand that was carrying something else, a tray, a pot, a bowl of soup, and happened to land on the stone for no better reason than balance. That's not irony. That's design. They built a recognition system calibrated so precisely that it could distinguish between a hand placed with intent and a hand placed by accident. And it chose the accident every time because the accident was honest. The accident revealed the hand's real work. I thought about Gil Emery 23 years ago, sitting deliberately in the seat and meeting silence. I thought about Dr. Taith, approaching with reverence and protocol and funded curiosity and getting cold. I thought about the garrison commander, the Ilari emissary, the mechanical hand that carried the right temperature but the wrong purpose. All of them reaching, all of them asking, and the throne, patient, silent, waiting for the one who came through carrying soup and tripped on a cable. The absurdity of it is not lost on me. 40,000 years of waiting, and the answer was a man who forgot to put his glove back on. But I don't think the precursors would have found it absurd. I think they would have found it exact. The glove was off because I'd been checking the soup. The soup was good because I'd made it with care. The care was there because my mother taught me and her mother taught her. The line. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt like hours. It might have been minutes. The understanding unfolded slowly, the way bread rises not in a rush, but in a continuous quiet expansion that doesn't stop until the whole shape has changed. I stood with my hand on the armrest and my eyes closed, and I let it happen because there was nothing else to do. The knowledge was not mine. It was being given to me, or maybe returned to me, the way a borrowed tool is returned to the hand that shaped it. When I opened my eyes, the hall was full of people, all 23, standing in their loose semicircle, silent, watching. The gold light was steady now, not pulsing a banked fire, warm and patient. The inscriptions on every surface were legible, or seemed legible, or at least present in a way they hadn't been before. Not just carved marks, but a complete statement, a single document written across an entire building, visible now because the light that was meant to illuminate it had finally been turned on. Sarn was closest. She stood 10 meters away, barefoot on the lit stone, her hands clasped in front of her, her face wet. She looked like someone standing in a cathedral who has just realized the cathedral is real. "Fel," she said carefully, gently, "what happened?" I looked at her. I looked at the team behind her. I looked at Geist at his station, his screens full of data he couldn't categorize. I looked at Creve, the linguist, on his knees near the fourth column with his hands on the glowing inscriptions and his mouth open, reading something for the first time. I looked at Torin, standing very still with his arms at his sides and his sidearm untouched. "It spoke," I said. "What did it say?" I told her the 6 words. I said them out loud in the air in my own voice, and they sounded thin and small compared to the way they had arrived, through stone, through bone, through the accumulated weight of hands that had never stopped working. But I said them. "Heir," I said, "the line was never broken." Sarn stared at me, then she looked at the throne. Then she looked at my hand on the armrest, my bare hand, scarred, thick, the hand of a man who had spent his life carrying trays and nobody had ever once looked at it and thought it was the hand of anything other than a cook. "The succession," she whispered. She was the one who understood first. 15 years of studying the inscriptions, 15 years of theorizing about the purpose of the throne, and she put it together before anyone else because she'd already suspected, or some part of her had suspected, that the sovereign line was not what they thought it was. "It's not political," she said. "It's not military. It's not genetic. It's the hands," I said. She looked at me. "It's what the hands do," I said. What they carry, what they've always carried, it reads the work. The practice, the thing you pass along without knowing you're passing it. Sarn sat down on the stone floor. Not a collapse, a deliberate sitting down. She put her hands on the warm lit floor and she pressed her palms flat and she closed her eyes and she breathed. And I think in that moment she was the second person in 40,000 years to understand what the hall was built for. Nobody said anything for a long time. Then Len's voice from somewhere near the eastern arches, thin and uncertain, fell. Is the soup still? I looked down, the tray was in my right hand. It was level, it was always level. The soup was lukewarm, the bread was cold, the dried fruit was fine. Right, I said. I lifted my palm from the armrest. The inscriptions didn't go dark. The gold dimmed not to black, not to nothing, but to a low warm glow like embers settling in a grate. The banked fire. The throne was lit and it stayed lit, and the columns were lit and they stayed lit, and the floor held its faint gold lines the way a path holds the impression of footsteps in new snow. The hall was alive and it was staying alive, and I understood without being told that it would stay this way, not because I had woken it. Because I had arrived and it had been waiting, and now the circuit was closed. It would be here when I came back. I walked through the semicircle of stunned, silent, barefoot people. Nobody stopped me. Nobody touched me. I think they didn't know how. I think they were looking at me the way you look at a word you've read 1,000 times and suddenly understood for the first time. The same word, the same shape, but now it means something and you can't unsee it. I walked to the night team station by the third eastern arch. I set the tray down on the folding table. I took out the bowls, 4 spoons. I ladled the soup. It was lukewarm, which is not ideal, but it was the soup that takes longer and it holds its flavor even when it cools, which is why I make it that way. My mother's recipe, her mother's before that. I set out the bread. I set out the dried fruit. Len sat down, he picked up his spoon, he looked at the soup, he looked at me. He looked at the throne behind us, glowing gold in the dark hall, warm, alive, patient. Good soup, he said. He didn't know what else to say, neither did I. It's the one that takes longer, I said. I collected the empty pot and the ladle and the bread board and I walked back across the hall, past the throne. My hand brushed the armrest as I passed, the way it had 100 times before, and the gold brightened for a moment, just a moment, and then settled, and I went back to my station behind the northwest colonnade. Behind me, I heard the team beginning to move, not with urgency, with something more careful, more deliberate, the caution of people who have just been handed something enormous and don't know where to put it down. Geist was already deep in his instruments, his voice low and steady, reading numbers to Sarn. Creve hadn't moved from the fourth column. He was kneeling there, both palms on the glowing inscriptions, reading them the way a blind man reads with his fingers, and the tears were still on his face, but he was smiling now, the private smile of a man who has just seen the thing he spent his life looking for. De Saint-Paul was on her communicator, calling the overnight liaison at Fell's Ridge, and I could hear her voice breaking as she tried to explain what had happened without having the words for it yet. Torin was standing exactly where I'd last seen him, arms at his sides, sidearm untouched, watching the hall with an expression I'd never seen on a military man's face. It took me a moment to name it, reverence. Marin Holt intercepted me as I passed her. She didn't say anything. She put her hand on my arm just for a second, just a touch, and then she let go and walked toward the throne, and I kept walking toward my kitchen, and that was enough. Some things don't need words. The touch said everything. The morning meal was in 6 hours. 23 people were going to need feeding. The project wasn't dying anymore. I knew that the way I knew the soup was done, without checking the clock, without asking, but the people still needed to eat. They would need to eat tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Whatever came next, whatever the council decided, whatever the linguists decoded, whatever the throne meant by heir, the food still needed to be made. Someone was going to have to make it. Someone was going to have to get up at 4 in the morning and light the induction plates and boil the water and set the grains and slice the bread. Someone was going to have to carry the trays across the hall, past the throne, to the tables. Someone was going to have to notice who ate and who didn't, and adjust. That someone was me. That someone has always been me. That someone was my mother and her mother and whoever came before, back and back through the dark to the first kitchen and the first fire and the first hand that stirred a pot for someone other than itself. I washed the pot. I set the bread to rise. I laid out the grains for the morning porridge. I checked the cold locker and made a note to ask about resupply. The hall glowed behind me, steady and gold, and outside the arches the 2 moons of Dane Reach were setting into a sky that was just beginning to lighten, and the first pale daylight was coming in, the color of old silver, the color it always was, except now it caught the gold in the inscriptions and turned the whole hall into something that looked, if you stood in the right place, like the inside of a living thing. I thought about my mother, her hands on the counter at 4 in the morning, the smell of the kitchen before anyone else was awake, the work that nobody sees. I thought about my grandmother's hands in the photograph, resting on the table. Still, the throne was waiting. It would keep waiting. It had waited 40,000 years for a hand that carried the old practice, the old instinct, the thing that says feed them first, feed them well, and never sit down before they do. It could wait another morning. I had bread to set.